We'll go ahead and get started here today. Thank you for joining us and join us live for Neighboring 101. This is the 37th edition uh, of Neighboring 101, and this is where we get together with leaders in the neighboring movement from all across the United States and discover ways that organizations and individuals can use the art and skill of neighboring as part of their community and personal development. Thank you for being part of the movement and being on live today. The advantage to being on live is you, of course, can ask the speaker questions, the questions you want to ask, and also have interaction with other people who have some shared interest in this area. You are joining 794 people from all across the United States that are part of this Neighboring 101 now. We have 39 states represented in Neighboring 101. A reminder also that past sessions of Neighboring 101 are available on YouTube. And if you get the 101 emails because you're a member of 101, Neighboring 101, you can access those at any time. That's one of the advantages to registering. And you can watch those videos. Our video of Seth Kaplan, we had a bonus session with him, and wow, we're up to like 400 views on that video. It may be our record setter from this program. So he has a new book coming out, Fragile Neighborhoods, and there was a lot of interest in that topic. So if you haven't seen it yet, watch for your 101 emails and click on that and watch that. Several of you have asked about Missouri Good Neighbor Week, which was September 28th to October 4th, and how that turned out. Jennifer and I will have do a special Zoom and a recording here at the end of the month to announce award winners statewide. We both have had strange schedules and we've had a hard time getting the full committee together to read over all the submissions. But we should be ready to make those announcements of the 10 top acts of neighboring and the 10 most engaged neighbors toward the end of the month. I will tell you that our goal was to document 15,000 acts of neighboring, and we actually ended up with 19,778. So we blew right past the goal for this year. We had more organizations and group sort of activities thanks to the 61 extension councils across the state that participated, and that really helped us hit a high mark for this year. And so we're already thinking about next year. And then a couple of reminders on upcoming speakers. We have a bonus edition of Neighboring 101 on November 9th. Our guest will be Dana Elwell. He is the director of Restore SGF, which is a block grant program designed to improve neighborhoods in Springfield. But the catch is, to get that block grant, you have to do the repair or beautification projects together with some neighbors. So if you have sidewalks and driveway that need to be replaced, your neighbors need to have some involvement in that. So it's an interesting concept, and he'll be explaining Restore SGF much better than I can, and also ways that you can be involved. Again, that's going to be on November 9th, and that'll be a 1:30 p.m. session. And then our next regular session of Neighboring 101 is November 16th. The topic will be using public art to reach neighbors and neighborhoods. We're going to hear from Alyssa Christie, who's director of a public art project in Midland, Michigan. You're going to be hearing from Michelle Masterson, who will be reporting on her public art project in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then Dina Dotheg and Lisa Overholzer and myself will be talking about the new Show Me Neighborhood Art Week that will be happening in June. So that'll be public art. Well, let's all forego any other announcements here and welcome our guest. I'm excited to have Dawn Everts along with you. Dawn is the author of Discover Your Gifts. I've got my copies here with me, including my my workbook and my other guide, Gifted for More, and that I've gone through, and I've taken my test for my gifts. But these are not the only books Don has written. I think there's about 10 of them online through Amazon you can find. And he has done writing for the Hopeful Neighborhood Project as well. So he's very prolific in writing, very gifted, and very skilled in areas related to asset-based community development as well. Don now lives in Springfield, Missouri. He's actually the senior pastor at First and Calvary Presbyterian Church, which is right there close to and on the Missouri State University campus. I'll drop the link to the everyday quiz in the chat. If you want to take that, we'll be talking about that. You can take it another time. But Don joins us from a very remote location outside of Springfield, but so glad that you have taken time to join us today. Don, good to see you in person again.
Thank you, David. Good to be with you. I'm assuming you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Sounds great.
So, yeah, I'm up here in Kansas City visiting my daughter, who's a senior at the Kansas City Art Institute. And so I had my PowerPoint and everything on this great iPad. I had everything set up. I was going to be able to draw it's for you guys. And I left it down in Springfield. As my wife said, that is very unlike you. So David does have the PowerPoint. I probably will call for it from time to time, David, if that's cool.
Yeah,
and,
I can.
Yeah, so just to give you guys a context or a framework for me. So as David mentioned, I am a pastor. I did work with both Lutheran Hour Ministries and the Hopeful Neighborhood Project when we were working on nationwide research. So I do want to I feel like my best add to you guys today is going to be to walk you through some of the findings that relate to gifts, but to give you a little bit of a context as it relates to neighboring and as these things, like as the rubber meets the road. I'm someone that moved every couple of years growing up, so I think it's kind of funny or ironic or something that I'm in a position I got to be a part of research about what it means to be a neighbor. And I will say that 2 years ago, we moved to Springfield, Missouri. And we decided we wanted to live in a way where we could have a pedestrian lifestyle. So I live 4 blocks from where I work. I happen to live in walking distance to downtown Springfield, where there are restaurants and shops and bookstores and cafes and all that sort of thing. So David Burton is like my hero. So and so we're in our family, we're asking questions. What does it look like to be neighbors when we kind of live in the city center and we have a lot of pedestrians walk by, a lot of homeless people near our home? So that's a little bit of where I come from. I know, David, am I right that the folks on the call are familiar with the Hopeful Neighborhood Project and some of the stuff, Jennifer Prophet, et cetera? Is that right?
Yes, they are. She's done some sessions as well. And of course, she's a graduate of the Neighborhood
Yep.
Leadership Academy with MU Extension. So there is a familiarity there as well. But hey, I got to stop you on this
Yeah.
hero word that got thrown
Yeah.
out here now. I think that may be getting thrown around a little too much. I don't think I want that, but we certainly have connected over a shared interest, that's for sure. And I remember when we met at the park, which is behind me here, the Botanical Center, and immediately realized we had this very shared interest. So I think all of us on this Zoom and those who weren't able to join us today, we all feel immediate connection when we meet up with someone who is a nut for neighboring. And we've got to stick together and support each other. And I think all of us are kind of heroes in our own neighborhoods, and that's really what matters.
That's right. But you are relentless in a way that's inspiring.
Oh.
And you're always thinking about it, and you're like trying to encourage other people. So I think the moniker fits.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Very kind.
But okay. So I want to get into the research because I think that'll be more interesting to people than necessarily my own story. But yeah, so if you pull that up, so we did research related to the Hopeful Neighborhood Project. And this was research about what everyone in the class, I assume everyone's familiar with asset-based community development. Is that kind of language that everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. And so we did a whole nationwide research with the help of Barna on neighboring. How do people perceive their neighborhoods? How do people belong or feel like they have ownership in their neighborhood? A whole raft of nationwide research about neighboring. And obviously, one of the big things that came up, which won't be a surprise to anyone, is related to yeah, slide deck. Yeah, you can send it to people, totally
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it was a lot of research about neighboring generally, but one of the specifics that came up was gifts and how gifted people feel and how do they become aware of their gifts, and all that sort of thing. So if you go to the next, so we decided to do a whole other raft of national research specifically related to gifts. How aware of their gifts are people? How do they develop their gifts? How do we help other people develop their gifts? Because really, asset-based community development, right? The gold there is that we're tapping into the assets that are already there. But what we narrowed in on was how aware of their gifts are people, right? And how do they become aware of those gifts? How do we develop our gifts, et cetera? So it was nationwide research. For some of it, we focused in on Christians specifically because of our interest in how churches were or were not helpful in helping people become aware of their gifts, develop their gifts, etc. And we found out that the church really has a lot to learn in some areas. But some of the research was just specifically about others as well. So here you'll see on this one, kind of this, one of the questions we asked people: how interested would you be in working with people in your neighborhood, using each person's giftings and skills to carry out a project for the benefit of others in your community? It's a great question, right? And mostly for the sake of this class, we'll just focus on that top answer there, which is like the US generally speaking. So basically, this is asking people the question: how interested in asset-based community development are you? Is basically what the question is getting at. And what you'll see there, and I am, because I forgot my computer, I'm on a smaller screen, but I can zoom in. In terms of people who were very interested, you can see 18% of all people in the US were very interested, 42% were somewhat interested. And so you've got about half of the country is actually interested in asset-based community development. They may not have heard of that. They don't know what ABCD is, but they're interested in it. And that's great. I was surprised by those numbers, but here's where we run into a problem, David. Is when we started drilling into with people across the nation in terms of finding out how aware of your gifts are you then? Because asset-based community development mostly works when people have some kind of awareness about their gifts, or they're involved with others who are helping them become aware of their gifts and to develop their gifts, etc. So one of the data points that just floored all of us and made us kind of reassess a lot. One of the questions we asked, and we don't have a slide on this, but I'll just kind of share with people, is we asked people, how gifted do you feel you are? On a scale of 0 to 10, how gifted do you feel you are? And the researchers, they did a lot to kind of help people understand, what do we mean by gifted? So we kind of explained that.
Oh, Don, did we
And,
Don, did
what
we
is
lose
this,
you? There we go.
the gifted thing ever? Oh,
We may
am I
we may have
am I still
lost you
here?
there for just a little bit. I don't
You
know if
got
you
me?
froze up with anybody else or
Okay,
if it's
okay,
just me.
okay. So did you hear me mentioning what we were asking people? So the question we asked people was, how gifted would you say you are on a scale of 0 to 10?
Okay.
And the national average is about 6.5. So people in the U.S. on average rate themselves as on a scale of 0 to 10, in terms of my giftedness, I'm about 6.5. Now we're gonna dive into this in detail. For example, men graded themselves a little higher than women. We can talk about that. Generationally, people graded themselves differently, and we found that there's differences generationally in terms of how aware they are of their gifts, how much they want to develop their gifts, etc. But the sobering statistic, David, that really floored me was, it's a small group, thankfully, but 3.5% of people in the US, 3.5% gave themselves a 0.
Mm.
And so, in other words, what they were saying is, I am not gifted at all. And that's a very, I'm glad that it's only 3.5%. But what that means is, if you have, say a neighborhood with 100 people in it, that 3 or 4 of them don't think that they have any gifts at all.
Yeah, even some of the studies that keep coming.
So that raises some questions. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, you're a little spotty there. I don't know if it's on my end or not. I hope
Yeah.
not. Yeah, even some of the research with loneliness and teenagers coming out, you're seeing numbers of a third of them saying they don't feel like they have anything to contribute, and they don't. I mean, so I think in some circles it's even worse than that 3%.
Exactly. So like the national average is 3.5. So it was too small. 3.5 is too small to really slice into the data to find out more about that group. But they were able to find some things out about this group. For example, they feel less ownership in their neighborhood. They don't have relationships with people in their neighborhood. Also, in general, they don't go to church. But we just kind of take that as meaning they're not in an association, if that makes sense. And so, in general, the data suggests that they are less connected to the people around them. We can't prove causality, but kind of like you say, the research about loneliness and how that corresponds with feeling like that I don't have a lot of gifts, etc. So, part of what it helped us realize, David, is that not everyone is naturally going to have a sense of what their gifts are and what they aren't, and have a sense of like feeling like people are helping them develop them, etc. And so that really empowered and kind of informed our research. We want to find out more about, how do people discover their gifts? How do they develop their gifts, etc. So if you go on to the next slide, I just want to kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Did you see the question from chat in
No,
chat?
no, no, because it turns out I'm just on a phone, so
Okay.
I can ask
here,
it, Don.
if
Yeah,
you could read.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
My question was, is the neighborhood wide and community, is that perhaps even too broad or wide or large of an area? And if this same question on the screen were to be asked, would you be interested in working with the people that live next door to you to carry out a project for the benefit of others on your block? Do you think you would see an even more positive response?
Possibly. That's a really good question. I will say that for the research, and I'd have to. It's been a while since I've been in the in the data, but we were pretty careful to define neighborhood as the place where you live, and the people who live right around you. Block is, I think, narrower than what we indicated, but it is very possible that that we would see more people indicate, because we weren't just getting at, do you want to volunteer, right? Like that's a totally different thing than like actually work with the people who live right around you. We could go back into the research on neighboring and neighborhoods that we found, but one of the things that we found is that a fair percentage, and I'm not going to be able to pull that data up, but a fair percentage of people in the U.S. are quote unquote living above place. In other words, they actually have no connection to the people in place where they live. They may go to school somewhere else. They may belong to an association or a club or whatever. But for a fair amount of Americans, they actually don't have a meaningful relationship with the people who live right around them. So actually, for some people, that's a disincentive. What we found is in our qualitative research, there are a number of people who are like, I'd much rather like go to a club or an organization and volunteer with people there than volunteer with people in my neighborhood because they don't know people in their neighborhood. So I think it depends on someone's experience and sense of ownership or relationship in the neighborhood, if that makes sense. Awesome. David, let's go to one. I want to walk through
Nope.
some of the slides, unless
Sure.
there's another question.
No, keep walking.
Okay. So here you go. We asked people, how well would you say you know or understand your own giftings, abilities, and skills? This was not the scale 0 to 10, but as you can see, I know them extremely well, very well, or mostly well. Again, in the U.S., 17% of people in the U.S. feel that they know their giftings extremely well. 29% say they know them very well, and then 27% mostly well. You will, if there are people on your call who are churchy kind of people or pastors like me or who are interested in that, there is an interesting statistical difference among practicing Christians where they seem to have a greater awareness. And if people are interested in kind of the churchy side slice of the stats, we can go back to that. But you can go ahead and go on to the next slide.
Okay.
So how well would you say you know or you understand your gifts? This is breaking down what we just looked at, breaking that down by generation. This one specifically, awareness. How aware of your gifts are you? So you guys can just kind of look at this. One of the things that jumped out at us were millennials. Millennials really jumped out not only with this question, and as you can see, they're a little bit much more aware of their giftings than around them. In terms of their interest in learning more about their gifts, millennials
We lost you again here, Don. I'm so sorry.
rank much would be interested in being able to develop. I'll just keep talking. Can you hear me again? Am I back with you?
You're back on now. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry,
great.
every once in a while you sound like a robot there, and we lose it a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. My technology is back in Springfield, so that's not one of my gifts, I suppose, today. So anyways, I was just talking about millennials are a little bit of an outlier. And also, when we asked questions about how would you be interested in learning more about your gifts, and this relates to the Every Gift survey that you mentioned earlier, and we'll talk more about it. Generally speaking, are, and the younger people are now. Why already discovered their gifts and they've gone helping to like leave a legacy and help others growing their gifts. What I find interesting is that among younger generations, activities, programs, conferences, etc., events that are geared towards helping younger people discover their gifts or develop their gifts, they are very motivated for those. That surprised me, but that was one of the findings. You can go ahead and go to the next slide if you want.
Is that the right slide?
Yep. So this is breaking down the same question based on, we gather data about people's socioeconomic status. I don't know if this is necessarily a surprising story. the higher studying thing, when we look at education, there are, and when things. So it could be that going further in education, you have more teachers, more coaches. Maybe you work in a place where there's more resources for, hey, we're having a staff development today, something like that. Again, we don't know exactly why, but this was a statistically meaningful difference in terms of people's awareness of their gifts. I think for those of us who are interested in helping people discover their gifts, this is also kind of an opportunity that people in lower socioeconomic situations, maybe this is an area where helping them discover their gifts, empowering their gifts, noticing their gifts, helping call out their gifts is something that is maybe a necessary thing or an exciting thing, an opportunity for us. You can go on to the next slide if you want to. This is more of a churchy kind of thing, so we'll come back to this one if people have questions. In general, what I'll point out, David, is that one of the things that we found is that churches and pastors are very interested in helping people, or they're very interested in people using their gifts for the sake of the church. But when it comes to people using their gifts for the sake of their community, for the sake of their neighborhood, pastors are less interested in that, less active in that. We tend to celebrate in churches. We tend to celebrate gifts that can benefit the church, not as much gifts that can benefit the community or society at large. And in general, in churches, we talk in very narrow ways about gifts. And so you can go to the next slide.
I would say that's an accurate statement and slide there from my experience. Yes.
Not surprising to you, right?
No.
Yeah. So what you see here, because of those findings that people need help gaining awareness and discovering their gifts, churches, we aren't necessarily as good at this, and we give a very thin view of a lot of gifts. That informed what we developed, which is called Every Gift, which are these 12 gift types that you see in front of you. And I think you held up your workbook earlier, the Discover Your Gifts workbook, David. Basically, what that workbook is, it's an entirely different piece because we developed one piece that was just about the statistics and the research. We developed one piece that was more for Christians. And then what you're holding up there, we developed a workbook that walks through 12 different gift areas and kind of what do they look like? How do they manifest? How do you point these out in other people? If you have one of these gifts, how can you develop them? Et cetera, et cetera. And so as folks can see there, there are management gifts, financial gifts, critical thinking gifts, artistic gifts, civic gifts, intercultural communication gifts, leadership gifts, teamwork gifts, technical gifts, interpersonal gifts, and entrepreneurial gifts. And the interesting thing that I found, David, as I was working on, because I helped even develop this, derived from the research, on what really helped me remember, not that I have, that I actually wasn't using anymore. I was in a season of life, and then I was in a profession where I wasn't using all those gifts anymore. And I'll be honest with you, like so this inventory that you sent everyone the link to, it's a completely free kind of research-based inventory that you can take. You can have people in your neighborhood take it, and they kind of get a report that kind of says, here's your top gifting areas. The results, when I got them back, David, they kind of a feeling word I could use stopped me in tracks as I realized. Sorry. Am I coming through still, or am I a robot again?
you're roboting some, and I missed whether you were surprised by your results or whether whether it made your day and made you feel good. I have a feeling you were getting ready to say you were surprised.
I was surprised, but I was also a little bit sobered because
Mm.
I I realized I wasn't using all my gifts, and it actually led to me making a vocational change.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, yeah. So actually, my bosses at the Hopeful Neighborhood Project, who I was working on this for, were kind of excited about it, but then kind of bummed because it meant me leaving and doing what I'm doing now in Springfield. So anyways, but we found the Every Gift inventory to be a helpful tool for helping people gain awareness about their gifts. So I'm going to pause, David, because let's see, what time is it? 12:34. I can go on and talk about developing gifts and how people's gifts get developed, etc. But I don't know if we want to stop for any questions about gift awareness before we move on to that, or should I move on to
Sure,
the?
that's fine to pause and see if anybody has any questions before we move on to that. I will say from taking that uh, inventory, I do like the report that comes with it because it gives you a list of some areas to grow
Yeah,
and areas you can share. So the areas to grow were a little sobering, at least for me. But that's good to have that time to reflect on those, and then some questions to think about to help you
yeah,
think about how you can improve in some of those areas. I think that's a good thing. It's not an overwhelming list. Some of these
yeah.
strength studies, 54 strengths or 36, it gets a little overwhelming. So I like the fact that this was a tighter group to consider.
Well,
Anybody have some questions at this point? You're always free to
yeah,
unmute and ask those or to share them in chat, either one. Or if there
yeah,
are none, we can
yeah. Let's go on to the next
proceed. Then, yeah.
let's move on. So we also did a lot of research trying to find out how do people develop their gifts, because once you kind of have awareness, how can you be intentional? So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. How can you be
Okay,
more
sure.
intentional about developing those gifts, growing in them? Because as you all know, it's one thing to have a gift, it's another thing to like get better at it. If it's a skill, how do you develop the skill, etc.? Okay, let me pinch in here. So one of the questions we asked, are there giftings, abilities, or skills you would really like to develop? And again, the green minty color here, I think would be the more interesting one. Interesting that 24% or 34% of all US adults said that they definitely have some things they want to develop in. And then you can see about half of the people said maybe. So there is some latent, if we have like community development people in the class today, David, I think what's encouraging about this is there is sort of there are people out there who are like, I want to develop my gifts. Now there are, what is it, 21% who are like, no, not at all. I have no interest in developing my gifts, you know, and we can take that for what it is. But then when we did a follow-up question, have you already put effort into developing those gifts in some way? You can see like a good 62%, if I'm seeing that right. Yeah. 62% said, yeah, I've actually already put some into that. So I think these are encouraging for us, even people who don't, know about their gifts, or maybe they've learned there is this kind of like passion or desire to develop gifts. Go ahead. You can go ahead and go to the next
Okay.
slide.
All right.
Here we see it broken out generationally. I mentioned this earlier, so it's the same question, right? Are there giftings, abilities, skills you would really like to develop? And so notice here that Gen Z, uh, a greater percentage of them said definitely, and you can see how it stair steps down, right? So I just want to invite your students to kind of look at this and think about what implications of this might be. How do we understand what we're seeing here? Again, it very well could be not that boomers are like, you know, just not interested in development, or bettering themselves. It could be that they are in a place in life where they've really developed their gifts, they've used them, and they're focused on helping others more now. That definitely could be the case. But even so, what's our number there? Yeah, 28%. So definitely, I have things that I want to work on. But definitely among boomers, a much higher percentage said, I'm not interested at all. But I find this to be a very revealing statistic that the younger people are, the more interested they are in being developed. And I think this is really helpful. I'm someone, because of my role as a senior pastor of a church, that I'm very active in helping people like see their gifts, use their gifts, develop their gifts. And to me, this is encouraging. And because of this, when I got to my current position, I'm working with much younger people than I've ever worked with before. I'm mentoring a 16-year-old apprentice preacher who's preaching in front of the entire congregation at 16. I never would have done that before, probably for a variety of reasons. But now I'm kind of realizing people want to use their gifts, have their gifts developed. So that to me is a very provocative slide. You can go on to the next
It
one.
is. Maybe by the time we get older, we think, oh, it might be that we've already developed our gifts, or it might be the thinking, oh, I'm too old to even bother with this now. Or I have somebody in my life who often said, when you talk about volunteering, they'll say, well, I've done plenty of that in the past. I've already checked that box, sort of
Yeah,
thing.
I will say yes. And there definitely is some research on leadership that I've seen where people reach a certain age and they just are done learning and they're done being developed and they're done growing. And I think that's, that's a very sad story. But I do think that's the case as well. Let's see, what do we have here? So we asked people, how would you agree with the statement, someone has invested in helping me develop my giftings? Again, the far left one there is the most interesting to me. And so you can see among all people in the US, 11% agree strongly. Someone has helped me, someone's mentored me. Part of what came out of our research was realizing that we need to like make mentoring sexy again. Like we need to kind of help people re-engage with like having a mentor. And maybe you're mentored in something, but you're mentoring someone else in a different area. As you can see there, 16% agree strongly, 30% agree somewhat. So really only 46%. So let's think about that for a second. That could be encouraging that, boy, 46% of people are like, yeah, I have had someone invest in me. And that's really encouraging. But what that also means over half of someone invest in them. And so I think that, the positive spin, David, is that's an opportunity for us.
Yeah, we'll go.
So
We'll go
go
with
ahead
the
and go on to the next. Yeah,
we'll go with the positive spin on that, right?
I think I have one or two more in the development. So this, let me show you.
Generosity.
Generosity has to do with again, me in investing in others and mentoring them. We did ask people who has invested in the development of your gifts and talents. So people may find this statistic, again, the minty colored all US adults, I think for most of the class, they'll find interesting. Notice friends, parents, family members are pretty high up there. We do have teacher, manager, just kind of a straight up mentor, if you will. What I find interesting in this, a leader in a church, that's kind of low down on the list, right? Or someone in my church, someone in the community. And so what's interesting is friends, parents, family members, teachers tended to be more who's currently investing in someone. So this can be interested for people who are motivated to help people get mentoring and to find mentoring. This kind of shows us where people are currently experiencing it. And then I think I have one or two more on investing in other people, and then I'll stop yammering so we can open up to questions. So here we have, I have invested in helping someone develop their gifts. So this is the area of generosity. Like I want to help other people with their gifts. You can see here in the United States, 16% of adults in the US agree strongly, 36% agree somewhat. So that's, 52, a little over half of us have mentored someone else in one of our areas of giftedness. This is one of the things I love about asset-based community development, is kind of that everyone you talk to, it's kind of, well, what gifts do you have that you could share? And one of the regular questions that's asked is like, what could you teach other people? What gift do you have that you could help impart to others? If we could like find ways of kind of unlocking the mentor in more people, how many more gifts would be coming to bear on our neighborhoods? So, and okay, I think maybe one or two more slides. I'm trying to remember.
Okay. All right.
This is that same question broken down based on low or high socioeconomic status. Again, people in a higher socioeconomic status have invested in someone else. Again, our read of this is that the story in this probably has to do with some of the context that they've been in, how people perceive them. It doesn't have anything to do with that people in lower socioeconomic status don't have things they could be mentoring other people in, if that makes sense. But again, this is a statistically significant maybe on this. Do we have one more slide?
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, let's not do that one.
Okay.
That's in the more churchy category. So let's go ahead and I want to leave some time for people to ask questions about the research generally, or how we've experienced people reacting to the research.
Sure. I can take that off and just have some general dialogue and Q&A here, especially around gifts. I love what the research shows. I love using research as a guide. It's important that we do that. Otherwise, we're just going off our own personal feelings. And you said that this taking this test kind of caused you to make a change in your own personal life. The quiz, the Every Gifts, has been around for a while. Are you aware of other sort of community, neighborhood sort of impacts it has had along the way? Have you heard anything specifically or anecdotally, I guess?
That would be a better question for Jennifer Prophet, I think.
Okay.
She's still
right.
in more ways. I will say, I have heard stories of people for whom, in the church context that I'm in, David, there's people have heard about spiritual gifts all along, and they have perceived that that's really the only thing that matters, if that makes sense. So like, sure. When I arrived at the church that I'm at now, we created what we called the gift exchange. And we invited everyone in the congregation to fill out things of what are different gifts that you have. And we used this 12 kind of thing, model of 12 things. And so it was everything from, it was fun. People saying, I'm really good at knitting and I'm really good at teaching people how to knit, or, I speak Spanish. So it was really fun, David, to see people within the church who were kind of putting out there, I bake, I do all these different things, not just what they're used to having talked about in a church, which, can you lead a Bible study? Do you have teaching gifts? Some of the more spiritual gifts, as we're used to talking about it. I found in my local church that was kind of a refreshing thing for a lot of people. And it was kind of like, oh, I get to be in the game too. Like my gifts matter as well. So I think it's a disservice the church has done by focusing on something so narrow. And so in my own context, anecdotally, I've experienced more people feel like I have dignity, I have worth, I have something to contribute. And so that has been encouraging.
Yes. And at least conversationally with people, when you talk to them about their gifts, I find people typically shrug that off and say, oh, I don't know, or I don't have any. Maybe it's because they haven't thought about it, or they have a false humility about it, or don't have that conversation. But
that's right.
As opposed to when you just listen to people's stories and you ask them about their interests in things, these gifts sort of bubble to the surface. And I think of a gentleman who I see in in my neighborhood when I walk my dog and when I was first trying to get to know him. And he was hard to get information out of. And even talking about gifting, he would just kind of laugh that off. But then later on, he mentioned a national contest he just won, and he mentioned what he had done in college as an athlete, but that took time and multiple
Yeah.
conversations
Yes.
to say, okay, you've been holding out on me.
That's right. That's
You've
right.
got tremendous gifts.
I have also found among retirees that the early conversations among people who are retired are about, the Kansas City Chiefs, their golf game, where they traveled. But once you scratch into, wait, you were an executive at a Fortune 500 company, like I bet you have some administrative and leadership gifts, or I remember someone in my church who finding out, and it was like after several conversations, that they're a writer, and they write newspaper articles all the time, and they're great with words, and it's like, why did I not know that? Like, why didn't you tell me that? So I think you're right, David. It takes like trust, conversation, to kind of pull those out. But I've found that people light up when you're like, man, so you have these gifts, and how could we use those? So
Someone else acknowledges. Does somebody else have something to add, or have you had a similar experience with that, or a different experience, I guess? Or do you have questions of Don? This is your chance. I mean, Don's hard to pin down, and so this is your chance to pepper him with some questions. Michelle says, I think most people have been repeatedly taught to be humble and not to brag, so it's just almost a reflex to say that they don't have any gifts.
Yeah. I agree, especially when gifts are acknowledged just because I'm special because I have the gift, rather than we have gifts to pursue the common good, to help my neighbors, to serve others. I think that lens on it can help people be less shy or feel less weird about saying, yeah, I have this to contribute. So I think that's a more helpful lens on it.
Laura from Excelsior Springs asked, what does it look like to help someone grow in their gift? Are there books or training in each specific gift area?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the workbook, we kind of go through, like, in some of the different giftings, what are ways that people can develop their gifts just on their own. So there are ways that on our own, how many people here have learned something? Well, I saw it on YouTube. How do you do this? And you look it up on YouTube. So there are classes, there are books, there are magazines, there are FAQs online and everything. So there's ways that people can do that alone. But the ancient practice of mentoring, I mean, this has been around. The word mentor comes from a character in an ancient novel that was it was me. And then bringing magic thing that happens when we can find someone who like has a similar gift or has been at it longer. There's something extra special that happens in that one-on-one kind of thing. So it does vary, based on what it is. If you're wanting to grow as a piano player, it's helpful to find someone who knows how to play the piano better than you, right? Or who can help you with that. So there are both solo ways that people can develop gifts, and then there's the ways of like just finding someone who's a little bit further along the road than you, who can encourage you.
Yeah, and even making that a priority, if that's really something you're wanting to do, you're going to have to commit some time and effort to it.
Yeah.
I think so many times we talk about it in theory and it sounds kind of cool, but when it gets down to maybe taking something off our to-do list in order to add that on, we're not so good at doing that.
One of the trends I've noticed, both in churches but also in the nonprofit world, and so that's more what I know, but I know I've heard stories that's also in the for-profit world. is coaching. And so the concept of coaching, like I want to coach for this specific skill. And that's something, there are a lot of people who can actually coach others in something, whether they have the skill or not. And so coaching is like in the air around us. There's a lot more interest in that. I have found that supervisors and employers are more willing to say, hey, to an employee, like an employee who says, I would like to receive coaching in this specific task. And that's much more common than it used to be, if that makes sense.
I was just reading an article last week about life coaches, which is maybe a little different niche,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
that is
Yep.
a $3 billion industry in the United States.
Man.
And then when I dug down through that, and they had some quotes from this guy who is a coach, he was basically saying, I just come alongside people and encourage them to keep doing what they're doing. I don't ever tell them how to do it differently. I
Yeah.
don't want to, you know, I let them discover their own way. So
Yeah.
instead of coach, it's more like a cheerleader, I guess, but still a huge industry.
That's right.
I think mentoring was even at one point, I think, wasn't that the subject of a Seinfeld episode? Seems like everybody wanted to get their own mentor. Um, but so we talk about, but really having someone who's going to share some advice and wisdom, maybe from their experiences, really invaluable. Not just someone that just cheerleads everything and says you
Yeah.
do you.
Yeah. But someone who has like the skills and the gifts. That's why a lot of our research too, we didn't do as much with this, but is about, if you have a skill, go mentor someone. Like, be someone who initiates and says, hey, I see you have this in you. I'd love to encourage you for a season in that. We need more people who are raising their hand and saying, I'm going to be willing to mentor the people around me, just like I want someone to come to me and say, I'm willing to mentor you.
Yeah. Carolyn makes an interesting observation in chat. Carolyn mentions that mentoring is a major component in the blindness community. And Carolyn's kind of a leader in that community here in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah. One of the things that we found, I think there are communities who it's more a part of their culture. One of the things that we found is that historically African American churches are much stronger at mentoring than some of the other ethnic specific or multi-ethnic churches. So I think there are different communities for whom mentoring is much more part of the warp and woof of the culture of what they do. So we could learn
Yeah.
from them.
Yeah. So our takeaways here today, we can do the every gift test questionnaire. We can learn our own gifts and grow the gifts we have, improve areas that are maybe of weakness, but we can also turn that around and be a coach or a mentor to someone in our neighborhood as
Yeah.
we help them discover and improve their own gifts. It's a circle, right, that we can be a part of and
Yeah.
continuing benefit personally, but also help improve others as well.
That's right. I remember going to my neighbor who I always felt guilty about my lawn because his lawn was so awesome. And so I finally went to him and I said, will you let me apprentice? Will you help me learn how to make my lawn better? And so instead of him being frustrated by my daisies, he mentored me. It was much better.
Well, that's awesome. I imagine he appreciated you asking, because there's one thing, people that love their lawns, there's one thing that irritates them. It's their next door neighbor having dandelions. I'm telling you.
Totally.
I may have even been known to spread my weed and feed a little bit beyond my boundaries at times.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Don, it's wonderful to see you, and I appreciate you. I know you teach and you have a church to lead, and you have a lot on your calendar. We appreciate you including this in your schedule today and getting online and visiting with us. And I think we've covered everything today. So just want to say again to everyone, thank you for being on live, and we'll send out the link to your PowerPoint here at the end of the day.
Awesome. It's great to be with
Don,
you.
Good to see you again. Thank you for your time. Thank